He called code enforcement on me. His plan, I assume, was that they'd show up, tell me to deal with the weeds on the side of my house, and he'd get to feel like he'd won something. Instead, the code enforcement officer took one look at the situation, turned to me and said, and I'm quoting, "I'm not sure why I'm here. You have a nice home." And then he noticed the fence that had been blocking my access to my own property for 4 years. The fence that my neighbor had 10 days to remove at his own expense. This is a story about property lines, a very angry neighbor. 4-foot weeds used as a tactical weapon, and one of the most satisfying backfires in the history of people calling code enforcement on their neighbors. Also featuring the best line I have ever delivered to someone's wife at my front door. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let's talk about what happens when you call in the authorities on someone who has done nothing wrong. We bought the house 4 years ago. It was older but well maintained. The kind of house where you can see that someone cared about it, even if some of the updates needed updating. Good bones, nice yard, carefully landscaped, which mattered to us. We went through the whole process, showing, inspection, appraisal, city approval, the full chain of people whose job it is to look at a property and identify anything worth noting. Nobody mentioned the fence. It ran from the front corner of my neighbor's house across his driveway with a gate all the way to the front corner of mine, and what it created, very effectively, was a barrier between me and a 30-foot-long, 4-foot-wide strip of my own property, right there on the side of my house. Mine on paper, completely inaccessible in practice. The neighbor mowed it was all grass. Nobody said a word. I didn't think much of it at first. It seemed like an informal arrangement that had been going on long enough that everyone had stopped noticing it, including the people whose job it was to notice things. Then November came, and with it, the water. It had been a brutal year for rain. 3 separate rainfall events that each broke century-old records, all hitting within the same calendar year. After the third one, I noticed water seeping into the basement on the side of the house that faced the blocked strip of property. Not flooding, not dramatic, just a quiet little intrusion that told me something was wrong with the grade on that side. A quick look confirmed it. The ground sloped gently toward my foundation. Every significant rain was sending water in my direction, collecting against my house, and eventually finding its way inside. I'm not an unreasonable person. I understood this wasn't anyone's fault. It was just a grading issue that needed to be corrected. My plan was straightforward. In the spring, hire a crew to regrade the slope away from my house and install a French drain so any redirected water wouldn't flood my neighbor's driveway. Fix the problem, protect both properties, move on. Like a good neighbor, spring came. I hired the crew. They went to that side of the house and started working. The neighbor came out screaming. It did not belong to him. But I wasn't there for the beginning of it. The crew told me about it afterward. They'd heard him out, processed the energy of a man who appeared to have started his day at a challenging pace and gone back to work. They regraded the slope, tilled, mulched, and left a clean flower bed where there had been a grading problem. Professional, thorough, done. I let it go. People have bad days. The crew wasn't rattled. The work was done. Maybe that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. The following year, I planted roses in that bed and hired a company to do a full yard cleanup, weeding, fresh mulch, the works. When they got to that side of the house, the neighbor came out again. This time it escalated. He took a swipe at one of the workers. He screamed at them to get off his property, using language I'm not going to repeat here. Language that made no logical sense given who he was directing it at. And that crossed a line I don't have patience for under any circumstances. I came outside. He turned his attention to me, demanding I pay to have his yard resodded, insisting my workers had damaged his property. I said no. He called me a bitch, repeatedly with genuine commitment. I told the crew to leave that side alone and went inside to talk to my wife. We made a decision together. If he wanted to act like this, we simply wouldn't touch that strip of property anymore. Not out of defeat, out of pettiness, clean and deliberate. It was on the side of the house. You couldn't see it from the street. It bothered me exactly 0%. But it shared a visual line with his yard, and a man that angry about grass was going to have to look at whatever grew there. By the end of that summer, the weeds were 4 feet tall. This spring was wet. The weeds were knee-high by early May. I was outside mowing my actual lawn when he came over the fence and got in my face. He wanted to know when I was going to clean that side up. I told him. When I had assurances that he wouldn't harass me or any workers I hired, I would be happy to clean it up. This did not satisfy him. The word bitch made another appearance, joined this time by the word lazy. He was building quite a vocabulary for our interactions. I told him to call the city and went back to mowing. He did not call the city right away. First, he went to the other neighbors and raised hell with them about the state of my property. I heard about this secondhand and found it more entertaining than concerning. He called the city. I want to pause and appreciate this decision because it requires a specific kind of overconfidence to call code enforcement on a neighbor. When your own property features aluminum siding from the 1980s, unedged walks and driveway, filthy aluminum awnings, and a back patio with weeds growing between the pavers. I am not judging the man's property. People maintain their homes to the standard they choose, and it's not my business. I've never said a word to him about any of it. His choices are his choices. And honestly, and I say this with complete sincerity, his property keeping values down in the neighborhood meant the tax assessor hadn't raised my rates, so I was practically grateful. But calling code enforcement when your own yard has violations is a specific kind of miscalculation. You are, at that point, inviting scrutiny to a situation that was previously The code enforcement officer knocked on my door the next morning. He introduced himself and told me why he was there. Then he paused. I'm not sure why I'm here, he said. I see no weeds. You have a nice home. I invited him to walk around to the side of the house, where the situation my neighbor had presumably described was located. We went together. The officer looked at the strip of property. He looked at the weeds, which were knee-high after a wet spring and not, it should be noted, in any part of my yard that was accessible to me. Then he looked at the fence. The fence that ran from my neighbor's house to mine, the fence that had been blocking my access to my own property for 4 years. He confirmed the property lines. He looked at me. He looked at the fence. Well, he said, there's nothing I can do about your side, but that fence is on the property line and he doesn't have the right to block your access to your own property. He's got 10 days to remove it. Then he walked the perimeter of the neighbor's yard. My neighbor also received notices about his patio weeds and his unedged sidewalk. The officer left. I went inside. I sat down. I thought about the man who had called code enforcement on me, expecting consequences for me, and had instead triggered a mandatory order affecting himself. I thought about it for a while. The next morning, his wife knocked on my door. She was pleasant about it. Genuinely, she seemed like a reasonable person navigating a situation her husband had created, and I felt for her in a human way while also being completely clear about where I stood. She asked if I'd be willing to split the cost of removing the fence. I told her, sorry, but us bitches are out of charity money this week. She nodded. She went home. The fence came down in the heat of summer. I could hear him out there, working at it. Could hear him on the phone calling his kids to come help because the job was bigger than he could manage alone. His children came. The fence that he had maintained for years, that had silently annexed a strip of my property for as long as anyone seemed to remember, came down piece by piece at his own expense. And now I have full access to that side of my house. The roses are coming out. I'm moving them somewhere I can actually enjoy them. The mulch is coming up. I'm laying landscaping plastic and covering the whole strip with pea gravel, clean, maintenance-free, and a daily reminder visible from his property that this is what happens when someone mistakes a neighbor's patience for permission. He could have let me fix the drainage problem in peace. He could have let the landscapers do their work. He could have had a flower bed with roses and fresh mulch running along the side of his house, maintained by me at my expense, for free. Instead, he has pea gravel. Here is the thing about calling code enforcement on a neighbor who is genuinely not in violation. It works exactly the way you hope, right up until the officer arrives. At that point, you have invited an official representative of local government to look at the situation with fresh eyes. Eyes that might, for instance, notice a fence blocking property access. Eyes that might walk the perimeter of the property belonging to the person who made the call. Eyes that are now professionally obligated to document what they see. He sent them to me. They found him. That's not irony. That's just what happens when you pick a fight with someone who has nothing to hide. I didn't want a conflict with this man. I never did. All I wanted was to fix a drainage problem, maintain a strip of my own property, and be a decent neighbor. I was willing to do it at my own expense in a way that would have benefited both of us. I tried twice. I got screamed at twice. Some neighbors you help. Some neighbors you give every opportunity to be reasonable, and when they decline every single one, you mow the lawn they can see and let the strip they care about grow to 4 feet. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they call code enforcement for you. If this gave you the specific satisfaction that only neighbor justice can deliver, smash that like button and drop a comment. What's the most spectacular backfire you've ever seen a difficult neighbor walk themselves into? I want every property line story you've got. And if you want more tales of patience, pettiness, and the occasional code enforcement, visit subscribe. New story every week. See you in the next one.